Not too long ago, Tom Kenny, the voice actor for SpongeBob SquarePants, revealed that he thinks the iconic sea sponge is autistic. But what if I told you that is not the only condition he has? And what if I told you he's not the only resident of Bikini Bottom that might be on the spectrum? In this video, I'm going to present my theory about SpongeBob and one of his best friends, so why don't you sit back, relax, and let me yap at you for the next 30 minutes. One common trait that a lot of autistic people have is naivete. Now, anyone can be naive, but with people on the spectrum, it's more like advanced naivete.
This isn't your average everyday darkness. This is advanced darkness.
And I think it's pretty safe to say that SpongeBob's level of naivete is pretty advanced. The first episode I want to discuss to back up this point is Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost. This is the one where SpongeBob and Patrick believe they killed Squidward because they accidentally melted one of his wax sculptures of himself. And this is a pretty extreme case of naiveness. I mean, Squidward is present throughout the episode, and SpongeBob continues to interact with him, effectively serving as his servant to make up for the fact that he unalived him. I mean, Patrick falls for it too, but he's not really being naive, he's just being Patrick. He's just that dumb.
Don't you have to be stupid somewhere else?
Not until 4.
To be fair to SpongeBob, we know that ghosts do actually exist in the Bikini Bottom universe. However, all the ghosts that we see on the show are very different to the way Squidward appears in this episode. Namely, they are translucent, they can fly, they don't have feet, and they can go through walls and other obstacles as if they don't exist. Squidward has none of those qualities because he didn't actually die. The only thing that makes him look even vaguely like a ghost is the fact that he put on some white makeup and a white robe, which is a little bit sus. Also, the ghosts of Bikini Bottom are green, not white. So it really doesn't make any sense that SpongeBob thought Squidward was a ghost in this episode. Another great example of SpongeBob being naive comes in the episode Imitation Krabs. In one of his countless efforts to steal the secret formula, Plankton makes a Mr. Krabs robot to infiltrate the Krusty Krab. Squidward notices this immediately, as most people would, but when Robot Krabs offers him the day off, he takes it, even though he knows it's not the real Mr. Krabs because Squidward's just a terrible employee. Then again, Mr. Krabs is a much worse boss, so I guess they're even. When SpongeBob runs into Robot Krabs, though, he immediately falls for it, believing that it is the real Mr. Krabs. He even buys Plankton's lame explanation about his new metal pants, which makes absolutely no sense considering he's a crab. Throughout the entire episode, SpongeBob is constantly interacting with Robot Krabs, doing all kinds of crap he normally would not do with the real Krabs, and is completely oblivious to what is really going on the entire time. When the real Eugene does come back, SpongeBob is so confused that he thinks the real Mr. Krabs is a robot instead, and he blasts him with tartar sauce. And there are plenty more examples of this throughout the show. One of my favorite instances of this is when he meets the Tattletale Strangler. After he gets him arrested for littering, Squidward informs SpongeBob who he is, and naturally, SpongeBob starts to freak out, so he seeks a bodyguard. A few moments later, he comes across the Tattletale Strangler again, but this time he's wearing a bad fake mustache, and literally nothing else is different about him. He's wearing the same exact outfit, makes no effort to change his voice, and as he follows SpongeBob around, he's constantly trying to get his revenge on him. And yet, the yellow sponge remains completely clueless, even inviting his bodyguard into his home, which is obviously just about the worst thing he could have done in that situation. Another episode that I think highlights SpongeBob's naivete is As Seen on TV. This is the one where he gets a cameo in the Krusty Krab commercial and it immediately goes to his head. He thinks he basically became a movie star overnight just because he ran into an old guy who thought he was a talking box of cereal.
Hey, I saw you on TV last night.
New bran flakes. Bold new taste. Bran flakes.
You did?
The episode also highlights just how unaware SpongeBob is of himself, which is another common autistic characteristic. Like, he has no idea what the people around him are thinking about him. When the customers at the Krusty Krab start getting annoyed that they aren't getting their food, he sings them a song instead of doing his job just because of an offhand comment he overheard earlier that day foolishly believing it was about him. At that moment, he genuinely thought that that was what the customers wanted. And that's a pretty extreme level of unawareness. Another one of the hallmarks of autism is the infamous meltdown. Meltdowns are very strong emotional responses to overwhelming situations. They can be triggered in a number of different ways. For me, I remember when I was a kid, I always had problems with tags on clothing and getting my hair cut. Like, I bawled my eyes out the first time I got my hair cut. And in hindsight, that was a meltdown. There's a reason why I haven't had a haircut since 2017. When it came to tags, I would literally cry when I put a new t-shirt on and the tag on the collar rubbed against my neck the wrong way, which was basically every single time. Usually those instances didn't devolve into proper meltdowns, but sometimes they did, especially if I couldn't get that tag removed quickly. Spongebob has had some pretty infamous meltdowns over the years. Perhaps the most famous is in the episode Pickles. After he thinks that he forgot the pickles on Bubble Bass's Krabby Patty, SpongeBob freaks out so bad he can't even take care of himself anymore. He literally does everything wrong, from wearing underwear on his face to sleeping under his mattress. This is a rather extreme example, but I think the fact that SpongeBob completely forgets how to be a person is a good allegory for what a meltdown can feel like. Especially because in this case, SpongeBob was completely in the right. He knew he didn't mess up, but everyone around him was telling him that he did. If you've ever been in a similar situation, you might be able to relate to that. I know I certainly can, and being on the spectrum myself, I can attest to the fact that being told you're wrong when you know you're right can really drive you crazy. In the episode Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 6, the motion picture, SpongeBob has a more stereotypical meltdown. After a hard day of working on the set, he lashes out after he learns that Patrick was filming with the lens cap on the whole time, so they didn't actually get any of the footage he wanted. This results in him going completely insane. He rips up parts of the ground, eats worms right out of the dirt, scoots his butt on the ground like a cat, and then starts crying. Personally, I've never eaten a worm or scooted my butt like that during a meltdown, but these things are different for everyone, and I think the overwhelming emotion SpongeBob displays in the scene can certainly be characterized as a meltdown. Another one of his meltdowns comes in the episode Boating School. Once he learns that he was cheating on his driving test, he immediately starts freaking out and crying to Mrs. Puff about it, showing no regard for their safety as he is still driving the boat. All he can focus on is how he cheated, which he never intended to do. Actually, this is kind of another point to his naivete, as he should have known what he was doing was cheating, but I digress. In this case, SpongeBob even puts his own life in danger unintentionally, as he can't help himself due to the fact that he's in the middle of the meltdown while behind the wheel of a boat. Another hallmark of autism is the classic special interest. Everyone has hobbies and things they are interested in, but the autistic special interest takes that to a whole new level. Like, we will spend hours hyper-focusing on something we are really into, completely oblivious to everything else, including our own bodies. Like, for example, one might sit at their computer for 8 hours straight working on YouTube videos about their favorite show talking about a sponge. If I am in hyper-focus special interest mode, I will forget to eat, drink, even put off going to the bathroom just so I can continue to watch YouTube videos about how various geological features on Earth were formed. And oftentimes, people on the spectrum can become hyper-fixated on these things for hours, if not days, weeks, or even months at a time. A perfect example of SpongeBob doing this is in the episode Have You Seen the Snail?, where he becomes so hyper-focused on beating the Dirty Bubble Challenge that he completely loses sight of the entire world around him, losing track of time for about a week to 10 days, according to Patrick. Special interests can be anything as vague as sports to super niche topics like the socio-political nuances of ancient Athens. Common ones that many people associate with autism are trains, dinosaurs, Legos, and rocks. But they can basically be anything. For SpongeBob, I think it's pretty clear that his main special interests are grilling, jellyfishing, bubble blowing, and karate. In the episode I'm Your Biggest Fanatic, we see SpongeBob become hyperfixated when he becomes obsessed with Kevin the Sea Cucumber. In the episode, SpongeBob meets him at the Jellyfishing Expo, and he just can't leave him alone. He's completely oblivious to the fact that he's annoying him, and he begs him for a chance to join the Jelly Spotters. He spends the rest of the episode basically being Kevin's bitch in an attempt to impress him enough that he will let him join the club. Little does he know that the whole thing is a setup so Kevin can embarrass him. Of course, I couldn't talk about autism without discussing masking. According to Google's AI overview, masking is a learned coping strategy used by people with autism spectrum disorder to appear neurotypical and be accepted in society. This is a pretty basic definition. I think it's a bit more complicated than that, but it's good enough for the purposes of this video. So ask yourself, does this sound like SpongeBob? Probably not, right? SpongeBob is generally not afraid to show people who he really is. However, there is one episode that I feel like is specifically meant to be about masking, and that is the season 6 episode, Not Normal. Squidward convinces SpongeBob that he is not normal, prompting him to change his whole life just to try and fit in. This leads to him slowly losing touch with his personality, replacing it with a boring, cookie-cutter fake persona. He starts talking differently, using almost exclusively small talk, which is something that autistic people hate, and he stops expressing emotion in a meaningful way, and even turns down playing with Patrick so he can do normal things. He also replaces his house with a classic suburban-style home, and replaces his grill with a computer at the Krusty Krab, which are meant to be satirical extensions of his dedication to being normal, I think. I think this episode kind of speaks for itself. It is blatantly obvious that SpongeBob is pretending to be someone he's not just to satisfy the people around him, namely Squidward. This is what many neurodivergent people do a lot of the time. It is kind of a survival technique to help us get us through social interactions, which can often be very difficult and stressful. But most autistic people would probably tell you that they are much happier when they feel comfortable enough that they don't have to mask. I think it is safe to say SpongeBob feels the same way, as the episode ends with him being relieved after he returns to his normal self. I think that pretty much covers all the major reoccurring autistic traits that SpongeBob has, but there are still several more things I'd like to point out that come up from time to time. I'll start with the episode Treats, where SpongeBob goes to extreme lengths in an effort to get Gary more of the snail bites after they are discontinued. SpongeBob just cannot say no to Gary, putting his snail's needs over his own. To me, this boils down to a boundary issue. SpongeBob has a hard time setting boundaries with people. We also see this in the episode Overbooked, when he scrambles around town trying to fulfill obligations to Patrick, Sandy, and Mr. Krabs all at the same time. Like with many of the things I have talked about so far in this video, anyone can struggle with boundary issues. But I do think it is a bit more common in neurodivergent folks, and it is certainly something that I personally have struggled with. I'd be curious to know how you guys feel about this though, so please leave a comment down below. One of my favorite scenes in all of SpongeBob is in Squilliam Returns, when Squidward tells SpongeBob to forget everything he knows except fine dining and breathing. And then we go inside SpongeBob's brain to see a bunch of little guys in there running things. This was probably just meant to be a joke more than anything else, but it is pretty autistic coded. A common phenomena with neurodivergent people is that we tend to visualize our own brains in very compartmentalized ways. For example, an autistic person might view their own brain as a filing cabinet, with drawers for specific memories or ideas, and within those drawers are files on different things. For example, I could have a drawer in my brain about my friend, and within that drawer are a bunch of files, each of them holding different memories. This is basically what we see in the scene, as SpongeBob's brain is full of filing cabinets and computers. Another oddly specific autistic-coded moment in SpongeBob comes from the episode Your Shoes Untied. This highlights a problem that a lot of neurodivergent children have, and that is to do with fine motor skills. In fact, learning how to tie your shoes is specifically something that a lot of autistic kids struggle with. Personally, I didn't learn how to tie my own shoes until nearly the end of first grade. I was almost 7 years old when I finally figured it out, and I specifically remember being one of the last kids, if not the last kid in my class, to learn how to do it. So the fact that SpongeBob completely forgets how to tie his shoes is at least a little bit eyebrow-raising for me. Finally, the last episode I want to talk about, at least when it comes to SpongeBob specifically, is Procrastination. This is a certified classic, simply one of the best episodes in the entire series, in my opinion. And I think the episode perfectly demonstrates what it can be like to struggle with executive dysfunction, which is a condition that basically makes it hard for people to control their thoughts, emotions, and actions. This is pretty common in autistic individuals, but I think it is even more common with ADHD. Luckily for me, I got both, so I got the advanced executive dysfunction. For most people, writing a 500-word essay wouldn't be that big of a deal. I mean, the word count for the script to this point is well over 3,000 words, so 500 really isn't that many. And at the end of the episode, we see SpongeBob write the whole thing very quickly. Once he actually puts his mind to it, it's not that hard. But when you have executive dysfunction, it can be extremely difficult to get over that barrier and actually put your mind to something. It can be very easy to come up with distractions like cleaning your kitchen, or talking to a friend, or feeding your pet, or whatever else it might be that is preventing you from doing what you need to do. Sometimes just the thought of all these things you need to do in a day can be so overwhelming that you end up just sitting there literally doing nothing. Personally, I sometimes find myself sitting at my computer, not working on a video, not working at my day job, not even watching a YouTube video or otherwise entertaining myself. I'll just be thinking about all these things, getting increasingly anxious until something snaps me out of it. Oftentimes, what does snap me out of it is a hard deadline, which is pretty much exactly what happens to SpongeBob. Once he realizes that his essay is due in a few minutes, he goes into hyper-focus mode and does what could have been a couple hours of work in a couple of minutes. But while it might seem kind of obvious that SpongeBob is on the spectrum, I now want to shift our attention to his next door neighbor, Squidward. I think one can make a pretty good argument that Squidward is also on the spectrum, and that is exactly what I'm going to attempt to do in this section of the video. You see, Squidward is the exact opposite of SpongeBob in many ways. While SpongeBob is easygoing, energetic, and naive, Squidward is hard to get along with, rarely has more energy than the minimum required to get through the day, and is generally pretty self-aware. But contrary to popular opinion, autistic people can behave like this. Actually, I'm not really sure if that is contrary to popular opinion or not, but I stand by it. Just like neurotypical people, those with autism exhibit a wide range of personality types and characteristics. While many are whimsical and easygoing like SpongeBob, some can be hard to socialize with. They can be very closed off to the world and have a hard time connecting with others. I think Squidward is a perfect example of this. That brings me to a rather important part of this video, but one that can be kind of tricky to talk about, so I just want to give you all a heads up. Time to talk about Squidward's mental health. Obviously, anyone can have mental health struggles. Unfortunately, it only seems to be becoming more and more common as our society becomes more disconnected and more online, and that's true for everyone. But studies have shown that people with autism spectrum disorder are more likely to suffer from things like anxiety and depression. In Squidward's case, I think his struggles with mental health are quite obvious. He stands out in stark contrast to SpongeBob, with the former constantly being happy and bubbly, while Squidward is grumpy and rude. I mean, in the Season 8 episode, Are You Happy Now?, they literally make a joke about him unaliving himself. Honestly, I always thought this was a pretty up thing to put in a kids show, but it kind of perfectly captures the mood of Season 8 overall, as Season 7 to 8 is the worst era of the show, in my opinion. But Squidward has shown signs of poor mental health throughout the entirety of the show, even in the early seasons. A great example of this is in the episode Mermaid and Barnacle Boy 4, when SpongeBob goes to Patrick seeking help after he accidentally shrinks Squidward. As SpongeBob and Patrick are discussing things, Squidward has this line,
I wonder if a fall from this height would be enough to kill me.
which is obviously a joke about unaliving himself. But I think Squidward's mental health struggles go beyond depression. I think there are a couple other things he is struggling with, first of which is agoraphobia. Agoraphobia is an anxiety disorder that basically causes one to struggle with situations and conditions that make them feel trapped, helpless, or embarrassed. It is often seen as kind of a general fear of the world, as people who struggle with the condition often spend most, if not all, of their time at home in a comfortable, safe environment. I think a great way to explain this in SpongeBob terms would be through the episode I Had an Accident. In this episode, it is not Squidward who becomes scared of everything, but rather it is SpongeBob who becomes afraid to leave his house after he shattered his butt while sandboarding. As we see in the episode, SpongeBob becomes so afraid of hurting himself again that he would rather shut himself out from the world and spend his days sitting on the floor of his living room, hanging out with a bunch of trash. Sandy and Patrick do their best to convince him to come outside again, but they're unable to do so, at least not until this gorilla shows up. While SpongeBob isn't normally so fearful like this, I think it's safe to say that his next door neighbor might be. It might not be as obvious with Squidward as it is with SpongeBob in I Had an Accident, but I think there's something here. How often do we see Squidward around town? It seems like he spends virtually all of his time at work or at home. I mean, there's literally that meme of him staring through the window as SpongeBob and Patrick are having fun, and I think those memes perfectly reflect how Squidward probably feels most of the time. Squidward is jealous of SpongeBob and Patrick because they get along so well together. I think this is because he has such a hard time forming connections himself. Probably because he's deeply insecure, which leads to him being inauthentic, and people don't like that. But this video isn't really about that. Luckily, not everything I have to say about Squidward in this video is negative. While I think in general he showcases the darker aspects that many people on the spectrum deal with in their day-to-day lives, there are really cool aspects that he has too, like the fact that he's so into the arts. This is very anecdotal, and it would certainly be impossible to prove, but I think Squidward's artistic side might be related to him being on the spectrum. He got that sad poet flavor of autism, you know? Maybe he has a hard time expressing himself with his words, so he does so through his art. Maybe that's why a lot of his art sucks, because he feels like he sucks, and he's become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Which is something I think a lot of neurodivergent people can relate to. I know for me personally, I've struggled with confidence and imposter syndrome for much of my life, but when I look back and reflect on things I've done, they're almost never as bad as I thought they were. That being said, Squidward seems to think pretty highly of his own art, so maybe this isn't really something that he deals with. Maybe art is just his special interest. But I also feel like Squidward's entire persona is a mask. I don't really think he hates everyone around him that much. I do think his better than thou attitude is real, but secretly he just wants to fit in. There are a few rare moments in the show that I think show his real character. I think the most revealing moment comes in the episode Pizza Delivery. First of all, I want to note that this is episode 5 of the entire series that now has over 300 episodes. The writers are still establishing who the characters are by this point in the show, so to me, this is a foundational episode for Squidward. I think when he stands up for SpongeBob at the end of the episode, that is the core of who Squidward is. He might be easily annoyed by SpongeBob, but at the end of the day, he still cares about him. And I think this is a rare instance where the mask comes off for a second. There are a couple other instances where the mask comes off for Squidward. One of them comes in the episode Idiot Box when he shows seemingly genuine concern for SpongeBob after he kicks the box, triggering an avalanche. Although, I've also hypothesized that this reaction could have been for an entirely different reason, which I talk about in the video that I'll link in the corner of the screen now. But let's just assume for the sake of argument that the reason I'm giving in this video is the correct one. Finally, we have the episode Band Geeks. I think it goes without saying that this is the greatest episode in the entire series, but that's beside the point. What matters for this video is that we get to see Squidward being himself in the episode. Most importantly, we see him being happy at the end of it when his band shocks Squilliam at the Bubble Bowl. Maybe it's just me, but his whole vibe in this episode is different. Except in that one scene where he leaves band practice crying. That's his normal vibe. But I feel like deep down, this is the version of Squidward even Squidward himself would like us to see. While I do think his mental health struggles are very real, at times it comes across as more of a mask to hide the fact that he's actually content with his life. Maybe he puts on this mask because he doesn't want to admit that he's actually okay just being a cashier at a fast food place. But I could be wrong. Okay, so that's basically what I have to say about Squidward being autistic, but I still have plenty more to say about him. You see, I think Squidward also shows signs of obsessive-compulsive disorder, which makes sense because people on the spectrum often have other conditions as well. This is a phenomenon called comorbidities. Unfortunately, we are still pretty far behind when it comes to research in this area and with autism and neurodivergence in general, so I can't really say this definitively, but it seems like people with ASD are more likely to have other conditions including ADHD, dyslexia, OCD, audio processing disorder, and many more. But even if Squidward is autistic, that is not enough evidence on its own to prove he has OCD. But before I point out why I think Squidward has this condition, first I need to explain what it can look like. Like many conditions, the symptoms of OCD can vary substantially from person to person, but at its core, OCD is pretty much what one might expect. Typical symptoms include compulsive or repetitive behavior, hypervigilance, impulsivity, and social isolation. There are a couple of episodes that came to mind right away when I was doing my research for this section of the video. The first being Squid's Day Off, the one where Mr. Krabs has to go to the hospital, so he leaves Squidward in charge of the Krusty Krab. Squidward takes this as an opportunity to give himself the day off, leaving SpongeBob alone to run the restaurant. But throughout the episode, Squidward can't just relax and put his mind at ease as he enjoys his day off. Instead, he continuously thinks of how things could be going wrong at the Krusty Krab as he comes up with ludicrous situations SpongeBob could be getting himself into. So he keeps running back to the restaurant to check on him, only to find everything exactly the same as it was before. As the day goes on, his trips back to the Krusty Krab become more and more frequent, and he is convinced something must be going wrong. He even starts to hallucinate SpongeBob taunting him at home as he thinks the restaurant was left with no one there. Of course, that is not what happened at all. It was just in his head, which honestly is a perfect description of what OCD can feel like sometimes. You just get caught up in your own head so much that you can't focus on anything else except whatever it is that is bothering you. Another instance where we see Squidward exhibiting compulsive behavior is in the episode Just One Bite, after he discovers that he actually does like Krabby Patties. When he first tries the patty, he claims not to like it, but as soon as he's left alone, he immediately becomes obsessed, even digging the patty out of the ground to eat it. Throughout the rest of the episode, he can't focus on anything else other than getting another sandwich. He even sneaks into the Krusty Krab at 3 a.m. so he can crush some patties. Also, I would just like to add here that the meme format from this scene, this one, is one of my favorites of all time. That being said, there are plenty more moments throughout the show where Squidward shows his obsessive thought process. In the episode Idiot Box, he can't let go of the fact that SpongeBob and Patrick are just having fun sitting in a box, using nothing but their imagination to entertain themselves. He claims that he's just going to let it go, but when he's back inside his house, he immediately starts crashing out over it. He even sneaks into the box at night after SpongeBob and Patrick go to bed so he can figure out how it works, assuming they have a hidden device of some kind in there. But what does he find in the box?
Nothing.
This brings me back to SpongeBob because I don't think Squidward is the only character on the show that shows signs of OCD. That's right, I'm diagnosing both Squidward and SpongeBob with autism and OCD. Please keep in mind, I'm not a medical doctor and this is just a video for fun. Like Squidward, SpongeBob has his moments where he becomes completely obsessed with something. The first example I'd like to point to would be the episode, Have You Seen the Snail? I know I've already talked about this episode using it as an example of SpongeBob's hyperfixations, but I think his attempts to beat the Dirty Bubble Challenge could easily be explained by OCD as well. I mean, SpongeBob clearly becomes obsessed with the challenge as it completely consumes him for more than a week. I think this is a good example of how mental health conditions can overlap, which creates a lot of gray area and nuance that can be difficult to parse through, even for medical professionals, which again, I am not. This is just a video for fun. Luckily though, there are other examples from the show that are a lot less nuanced. Perhaps the best example of SpongeBob showing signs of OCD comes in the episode The Secret Box, as he undeniably becomes obsessed with Patrick's secret box. Throughout the episode, SpongeBob becomes increasingly desperate to know what is in the box because he just can't stop thinking about it. Like he is physically, literally unable to stop thinking about it, and he comes up with all these hypothetical situations to fill in the gaps in an effort to satisfy his curiosity. Like Squidward in Just One Bite, he goes to pretty extreme lengths to try and figure out what is in the box, including breaking into Patrick's house and taking it from his arms as he's sleeping. insane behavior. Another time SpongeBob gives OCD vibes is in the episode Missing Identity, when he recalls losing his name tag from work. For me, the main thing about this is just that he can't stop freaking out over something seemingly so insignificant as his name tag. Granted, Mr. Krabs announced a surprise employee inspection that day, but I don't really think that's why SpongeBob was freaking out about it. In reality, he just couldn't stand the thought that something was out of place and he couldn't do anything else until that problem was fixed. I also think that it is very fitting that he literally retraces his steps over and over again in the episode, which again is kind of emblematic of OCD. A great example of SpongeBob and Squidward being OCD together is the episode Crabborg, when SpongeBob convinces Squidward that Mr. Krabs is a robot. Normally, Squidward is far too logical and level-headed to fall for something like this, but once he becomes convinced, he buys in completely. Of course, Mr. Krabs is not a robot, as far as we know, and it's pretty obvious that SpongeBob and Squidward were overreacting to a series of coincidences. But what do you think? Did you find my arguments to be convincing? If you like this video, I'll put another one on screen now that I think you'll like just as much. Thank you so much for watching, take care, and until the next time, never forget to be yourself.